Come with us to Muir Street. Come with us to the laneways of history.
I'll tell you a story of a row in the town. When the green flag went up and the crown flag came down, was the neatest and sweetest thing ever you saw. And he played the great games they call air in the bra. Now here's to Pat Pearce and his comrades who died: Tom Clark, MacDonough, McDermott, McBride. And here's to James Connolly, who gave on hurrah and placed the machine guns for air in the bra.
James Connolly Heron, great grandson of James Connolly.
I'm Brunches O'Rahilly, grandson of the O'Rahilly. We're here right in Princess Street here on a lovely Sunday morning, and this is where a lot of the volunteers enter through that side door there.
The O'Rahilly, on arrival at the GPO after being greeted by both Pearce and Connolly, took over the security of all the cash and stamps. He positioned himself on the upper landing and placed all these in one safe, which he ordered a newly arrested British prisoner by Connolly to safeguard. He then took up other roles such as sorting ammunition in the cellar and ensuring prisoners were treated with dignity.
It was here that Eamon Martin was the last person to drive that car, delivering rifles back here. The car subsequently was burnt and ruined in the aftermath of the rising.
Yeah.
When they were coming out with the wounded out of the GPO, they were hit with there was an awful lot of gunfire from the bottom of Moore Street, Parnell Street.
That's right.
So rather than go down that way, they came this way and through the arcade. And they were very brave women to do it.
Okay. And there was fire and burning everywhere, I think.
Absolutely.
And, it was mayhem here.
The heat was so intense from across the street, from the Imperial Hotel.
Yeah.
There was a Republican flag on top of the Imperial Hotel.
Yeah.
And an eyewitness said that he can always remember, apart from the heat, because they were at the windows, that he could remember every time another thing caught fire inside the hotel, another ceiling caught fire, the flag would blow to the west.
Two 1916 leaders out in the field of action during the course of that momentous week in our history, the O'Rahilly and James Connolly. James Connolly left the GPO on two occasions, once to secure positions in Liffey Street, not 100 metres from here. On the second occasion he left and went up this laneway with a group of volunteers into Abbey Street. And he left the volunteers who were moving on up to secure positions against British troops emerging from Capel Street. And as he turned to come back to the GPO, he received a bullet wound to his ankle.
Okay.
He then had to make his way back up. The volunteers had left him, and he made his way back up through this lane, crawling his way up the laneway to the side door of the GPO, where he let off a revolver shot, and one of the Plunkett brothers emerged from the GPO and dragged him inside. And for the rest of the week he effectively took command from lying on a stretcher.
Okay.
So Pearce said afterwards that though he lay wounded, he was still the guiding brain of their resistance.
On Friday evening, 28th of April 1916, with the GPO engulfed in flames, the forces of the newly formed Irish Republic retreated from the building and endeavoured to make their way to the Four Courts garrison. They left the GPO by the side entrance in Henry Street.
This is the side door of the General Post Office, as you can see. And it's a very historic door, because this is where the 350 garrison eventually left the burning GPO. The heat was so intense from the burning buildings across there, which is the Imperial Hotel especially, that the people just couldn't stand at the windows anymore and guard the GPO. A lot of that came, of course, from the shelling from the Helga, the ship down on the Liffey. The O'Rahilly, my grandfather, decided to put out a British garrison down in Williams and Wood's factory, which we'll see later on.
Okay.
And he asked for a few volunteers here. So 12 men came forward, and he went with those 12 men down towards Moore Street to try and put out that garrison.
He, O'Rahilly, shook hands with me and bid me goodbye, and then he said, "I wonder do those fellows still think we're afraid of them?" Meaning, of course, the British. O'Rahilly drew his heavy automatic pistol and, pointing towards Moore Street, gave the order to charge. Charge for the glory of God and the honour of Ireland.
I feel the fog of passion, vain or lonely. But freedom comes from God's right hand, and leads a godly train. And righteous men will make our land, and we shall once again.
21 Henry Street.
Okay.
It was in this building in the first floor the week before the Rising. The Proclamation of the Irish Republic was signed. 7 signatories met here to finally sign the document. They play a leading part in Irish history. The Proclamation of the Irish Republic guaranteeing equal rights and equal opportunities to all citizens. All 7 leaders met on the first floor. At the time, it was a shop owned by Jenny Wise Power, who ran a provision store here. And the entire terrace from Moore Street down to Arnott's behind us was destroyed in the British bombardment of the city. So this building isn't the original building, it was rebuilt after the Rising. And what makes Moore Street unique is that the Moore Street buildings are the great survivors of the Rising. They weren't blitzed during the course of the bombardment, so we have a terrace of houses that dates from before the Rising and survived the Rising. Of this building, this location, is it's where we know the leaders met. It's one of the locations where we know the leaders met during the course of the time before the Rising. They met in this building, we know they met in the General Post Office, of course, and we know they met in Liberty Hall. And what makes Moore Street unique is it's the only location left to us where we know the leaders met that's exactly the same as it was then.
Okay.
All the other locations, the General Post Office, Liberty Hall and this building here, have all been rebuilt since the Rising.
Now, this was the first act of the evacuation when my grandfather, along with the 12 brave volunteers, decided to come down here and charge down towards that building, which is completely renovated now, down at the end of Moore Street. That was called the Williams and Woods factory. There was a barricade here, which they had to get pushed to one side to get down here, the road. But on the far side, there was a British barricade. They didn't realise how heavily manned it was, and unfortunately, there was a Maxim machine gun down there. The flank, on my grandfather's orders, he took the right-hand flank, 6 men. 5 other men were on the other side.
Okay.
They approached very, very heavy gunfire going down along here. They were very close to the buildings, and they crossed the lane here. And there was there was an awful lot of ricocheting going on, a lot of fire, a lot of sniper fire.
Yeah.
So eventually, anyway, they made their way down here.
Okay.
Hanlon's Fish Shop.
Yeah, Hanlon's Fish Shop would have been
just down there where that sign is down there.
Oh, the pull end.
Yes. And the 2 men behind the O'Rahilly were shot.
Okay.
And the eyewitness report that I have was by a Tom Crimmins.
We had just entered the street when I saw a British sniper rush from a house on the opposite side of the street. I fired across the street at him and he went down. At the same moment, they opened up with machine gun fire from Parnell Street. I was just about at O'Hanlon's Fish Market at the time. I do not know if my shot got the sniper or if he went down from the machine gun fire. The man behind the O'Rahilly was killed. I got hit in the foot. The O'Rahilly made a dash to get back to the lane when they opened up on him. He fell on the sidewalk in Moore Street and at the corner of the lane. He said he was hit in the stomach and spine. He was not able to move and in great pain. He asked me how I was. I told him I had been shot in the ankle.
His men were lying dying on the footpath behind him. So he stuck his head out. He was only yards from this barricade, so he kind of very nearly got there, which was a great feat by 13 men against a Maxim machine gun on a very heavily armed barricade.
Yeah.
So he came back out and he was shot through the stomach and through the spine. He dragged himself then into what's now called O'Rahilly Parade.
The O'Rahilly had left the GPO with a view to making a sortie down Moore Street, as Prunchis has described, in order to get to another great building in Dublin at the time, Williams and Woods, that would become the next headquarters, because the General Post Office at this stage had been subjected to firebombing, and the building was no longer tenable to hold the building.
Pearse stood at the Henry Street exit with what appeared to be plans in his hand. There was some delay and there was something of a press behind him. The building was now well alight down to the ground floor. There was something of a crush, but no panic. We crossed the lane by rushes, between bursts of heavy fire. When we reached the side door leading into Henry Street, Commandant Pearse was standing in the small hallway, watching and waiting until the last man had passed out of the building. I could see the bullets like hailstones hopping on the street, and I thought that it would be a miracle to get to the other side scatheless. With head down as if running against heavy rain, I ran as I never ran before or since, and got into Henry Place without a scratch.
There was a young volunteer called Sean McLaughlin who'd been on courier duty between the Quays, the Mendicity Institute and the Quays and the General Post Office during the course of the week. And he was aware, because of his courier duties, that the British forces were gradually encircling the city and moving in towards where we stand today. And when he heard that the O'Rahilly had left the building, knowing that British had been occupying Parnell Street and the danger there would be in emerging onto Parnell Street, he left the side door of the General Post Office, made his way down, took a left at the end of the laneway. He turned the corner, he heard the gunfire that effectively stopped the O'Rahilly charge, machine gun fire. So he turned to come back into the GPO to warn the rest of the garrison. And as he turned that corner, Michael Collins led the first contingent of volunteers from the side door of the GPO into the laneways. This was the start of the evacuation of the General Post Office, and these became the lanes of history. And when the volunteers emerged into this laneway, of course, they were out of immediate danger in the sense that they were out of the line of machine gun fire. But the area was still being subjected to British bombardment through shell fire. So great panic ensued in these laneways. Volunteers scrambled over buildings in an effort to get away. Others turned back to go back to the GPO but couldn't go back because of the phasing inferno that the GPO had just become. And eventually the entire garrison would emerge into this laneway here, taking a left to be trapped again at Moore Lane because there was a British Army barricade at the top of Moore Lane. So when Sean McLaughlin turns to go back to the GPO, he sees Michael Collins emerging with the first batch of volunteers, 20 volunteers. And from then on, Padraig Pearse at the side door of the GPO with a wave of a sword would usher 20 more volunteers across. And eventually the garrison of 300 volunteers would occupy these entire laneways here. And when they emerge into this side here to get out onto Moore Street, they're trapped because there's a machine gun post at the other end of Moore Lane, which is the first turn here on the right. So they're trapped in this section of laneway here. And eventually the leadership emerge into the laneways. James Connolly is still giving orders lying in the street here.
We crossed at the end of Muir Lane, and having proceeded down Henry Place, we found that junction also under fire. We broke into a store, which was quite convenient to the entrance of Muir Lane, and we brought out a vehicle. I think it was an old float. on which we piled all kinds of stuff. We moved a dray across the street to block the fire, and having formed some kind of an obstruction there, we crossed the lane.
And it's decided that they needed a barricade to shield themselves from the gunfire in Parnell Street. So they drag a delivery truck from this building, which is the O'Brien Mineral Water Works building. Okay. This entire block consisted of the Mineral Water Works building, except it was dissected by what's known as the White House. Okay. So the entire block, volunteers occupied the O'Brien Mineral Water Works building, drag a delivery truck out and place it across the mouth of Moor Lane.
Sure.
And again, volunteers in batches of 20 rush across, and 17 volunteers fell wounded in this laneway. Michael Mulvihill lost his life and was found the next day leaning against the bottling stores here on the right. The entire garrison is trapped here in this dog leg here.
Okay.
So this is where the barricade was placed across Moor Lane.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the original cobblestone still here.
That's very important.
So as the volunteers made their way across, again Joseph Plunkett ushered them across with the wave of his sword, and Henry Coyle, another volunteer, fell dead in this laneway, accidentally shot as he tried to break a door in door of one of the cottages that were here at the time. This here is what was then known as the White House.
Okay.
And the gunfire from the machine gun post in Parnell Street and from sniper fire from the roof of the rotunda was so intense that the volunteers thought that gunfire was coming from this particular building. Michael Collins was ordered to secure it. We went in to discover there was nobody in it. But the gun tells you the intensity of the fire was so great that they thought fire was emanating from the building. In actual fact, it was ricocheting bullets from machine gun fire. Well, in these laneways you had tremendous courage, bravery,
Was it intense fire as well?
great sacrifice. Sean McLaughlin came into his own in these laneways, and that he took control here. And James Connolly was so impressed by what he did in these laneways that he eventually would give him his command in number 10 Moore Street, the house, the point of entry for the volunteers into the terrace. So here we have a 20-year-old volunteer, Sean McLaughlin, who becomes Commandant General of the Dublin Division of the Army of the Irish Republic. James Connolly hands him his command. And for many years later, Eamon de Valera was referred to as the last surviving commandant. But in actual fact, this unknown volunteer, Sean McLaughlin, outranked Eamon de Valera at the time. Now, if you look up there,
Yeah.
you'll see the outline of O'Brien's underneath the Good Olds of Ireland Limited. You'll see the outline of, in black lettering, OBRIENS.
Okay.
The original O'Brien's Mineral Water Works building. Now, all these buildings in this particular section of laneway were occupied by volunteers. They were seized and occupied and held in the name of the Irish Republic. The O'Brien Mineral Water Works building, the White House, and both buildings here, the bottling stores for the Mineral Water Works.
Sure.
So a decision was taken. The only route of escape for security reasons would be to enter the terrace. And volunteers proceeded to break their way in through what was originally a doorway here, widened the doorway with crowbars, and entered number 10 Moore Street. So this became the point of entry into the terrace, and the terrace became the last headquarters of the Provisional Government of the Irish Republic in 1916. So this building was the first building to be secured. But this became, the first Council of War was held, on the evacuation was held in this building. And the leaders spent longer in this building, number 10 Moore Street, than they did in any other building in the area. They spent their first night in this building. And while it was during the course of that night that volunteers were ordered to tunnel their way up through the entire terrace. Okay. So the entire terrace eventually became the last headquarters. Number 10 Moore Street, the point of entry for the volunteers, is perhaps the most historic house in this area, in the sense that the first Council of War was held here. James Connolly hands his command to Sean McLaughlin in this house.
We took up positions at all of the windows, and I have never forgotten the long, awe-inspiring night that followed. The city was in darkness, and the only light was that of the burning GPO, reflected on the windows across Moore Street.
Padraig and Willie Pearce slept that night in the first floor bedroom,
Okay.
front first floor bedroom, under their great military coats. Sean McLaughlin describes the scene, and McLaughlin himself slept under the table that they slept on.
Okay.
So the leadership the next morning had their breakfast here, their last meal, and then made their way up to the centre of the terrace, because the safest place to be was the centre of the terrace, because they were still expecting a ground force attack. During the course of that evening, a barricade was placed across
Yeah.
Moore Street, and another barricade placed here.
Okay.
During the course of the evening, Jack Plunkett was on duty. Jack Plunkett was Joseph Mary Plunkett's brother.
Yeah.
He was on duty here, and he heard cry for help coming from across Moore Street.
Okay.
And thinking it was a volunteer, he made his way over the barricade under fire from the British Army machine gun post, and lifted what he thought was a volunteer over his shoulder and made his way back across here and handed the wounded person over the barricade, to discover there was a British soldier.
Okay.
So Plunkett then decided to make his way back over the barricade, crossing Moore Street again under fire, to collect the soldier's rifle. And that British soldier eventually would end up in 16 Moore Street with the leadership. This is where the leadership ended up, in number 16 Moore Street. And the other volunteers fanned out through the rest of the building. So each and every house in this terrace was secured and held. But this became the last headquarters, number 16, and is now a national monument. Numbers 14 to 17 are a national monument as a result of campaigners' efforts.
You may not care what goes on in this street. You may not care that this street is to be turned into a gigantic Dundrum shopping centre. Well, the essential difference is that we care. That's what counts. We care.
Beware the risen people, 'cause we're coming down your street. We will not lie down. We will not lie down. Sticks and stones will break our bones. We will not lie down.
A preservation was issued on those 4 buildings to preserve them, but the rest of the terrace will be destroyed under the present planning application. In fact, the entire area and all the houses we refer to we will lose should the planning application to destroy the area go ahead. Number 16 became the last headquarters. Number 15 is the house from which Nurse O'Farrell emerged with a white flag after the decision was taken to surrender. And number 17 is where James Connolly was carried out eventually and placed outside Hanlon's 2021 Moore Street with the other wounded.
That's where the Polish shop is there, is
Where
it?
the Polona shop now
Yeah.
started.
Okay.
The only way in which we know this building is of importance is a plaque was placed on it in 1966 saying that here on the 29th of April decision was taken to surrender. And the importance of that plaque for us today is that the campaign started when one of our volunteers on the campaign committee was walking down the street one day and noticed the plaque had gone missing. He made inquiries of the National Graves Association, who discovered the plaque was on the wall of one of the developers' offices, and asked for it to be reinstated. And it was then we discovered that the entire area was about to be destroyed for the purposes of planning. 2021 is the building where the volunteers met and agreed to accept the surrender order, and the last 2 houses on the terrace where the O'Reilly fell.
We reached the corner of Muir Street, and Clark called upon me to occupy these buildings and to dig from one building to another in order to extend our position. We smashed our way into this building and progressed as instructed from house to house. We continued to extend our line until we reached the lane which intersects Muir Street about 50 yards from Parnell Street. I, at this stage, reported back to say that the line had now been extended as far as it was possible to go.
So volunteers burrowed their way through the terrace at different levels so they wouldn't leave a line of fire behind them, and wherever they found it easy to burrow through, the easiest part of the structures. So each and every building was occupied and held.
We were using a very large crowbar, and each man would take his turn at the bar for a few minutes and then stop to rest, with a fresh man taking his place. During one of my spells of rest, I lay flat down on the floor awaiting my turn to work the crowbar, and fell fast asleep. In one small room I came across two of our men lying fast asleep, their heads near the fender and feet almost touching the wall opposite. They were so exhausted that they had to be lifted bodily through the board walls.
During the course of that evening, Padraig Pearse had a meeting with Oscar Traynor here in Hanlon's building and discussed the civilian population.
The 18th Royal Irish, a regiment of Irishmen in the British Army, had shot at everything that moved in the street. At such short range their shooting was deadly. I saw an old man come out of a shop. No sooner did he appear than a bullet from one of the Royal Irish struck him and he fell. A little girl about 4 or 5 years started bawling, "My granddad is dead."
One of the reasons that led to the decision to surrender was that Pearse, looking out through the windows of number 16, had witnessed 3 civilians being shot dead under a white flag. This entire zone was a battle. This was the great battle, the last great battle of 1916.
Now, as I said earlier, they broke into 2 flanks, and the realities of this are now already 3 of his men, Carrigan, this is why they call it Dead Man's Corner, Shortest, they were mown down as well there. So he rushed up to a doorway here. Okay. There was an old pub there in the corner, but there was a doorway there, and that's how close he got to the barricade, just down there at the street there. That was Great Britain Street. Now, when Sean McLaughlin came around the corner, he knew by the devastation that they were up against a machine gun. They didn't know that until that time. But when he hid there in the door, he put his head out to have another go at this barricade. It is said that he had received 1 bullet already in his stomach, but the other one hit his spine. So with that, he dragged himself around here, that corner there. This was Sackville Lane. And there's a doorway over there, a blue doorway, which is another doorway, naturally enough. He slumped at that doorway there. His head was on the roadway, but he lay there mortally wounded in an awful lot of pain, and that was approximately 5:30 on the Friday, on Easter Friday. And an ambulance driver came here. He didn't know whether he was dead or alive, but he went in to check on him. And when he went in to check, they had the actual stretcher, and a uniformed British officer came up and told him to get out of there, that he wasn't the type to take my grandfather's body. So he left, and he felt very badly about this because he was still alive, but he was in a lot of pain. My grandfather then, at some stage during this, wrote on that door, "P. O'Reilly died here." And Mitchell, that ambulance driver, had come back again and was refused. And he turned around and questioned this sentry, now they had a sentry here, and the sentry said, "I don't know who he is, I'm just following orders, but he must be some important bastard." So he was left to die that agonising death there. But while he was there, he managed to take a note out of his pocket and write on the back of the note, the famous note home. "Darling Nancy, I was shot leading a rush up Moore Street and took refuge in a doorway. While I was there, I heard the men pointing out where I was and made a bolt for the laneway I'm in now. I got more than 1 bullet, I think. Tons and tons of love, dearie, to you and the boys, and to Nell and Anna. It was a good fight anyhow."
Many of the GPO garrison had come in from Kimmage, but originally they were British born. They'd come over from Britain. So they were from Liverpool, London, Glasgow. And they believed that upon surrender they'd be shot on sight as deserters.
Yeah.
So they gathered in the rear gardens of Hanlon's, this double-fronted building here. And they were spoken to by Thomas Clark, asking them to accept the surrender order. Joseph Plunkett tried, and they were still refusing to accept it. Michael Collins had his say, and they were still refusing. And it was only when Sean McDermott implored them to accept the surrender order that they agreed. And it just tells us the high esteem at which Sean McDermott was held by the ordinary volunteers as Tom Clark's right-hand man, that he was the one who finally impressed upon them the need to surrender at that particular moment in time.
I was one of the party addressed by Sean McDermott. He explained the exact position to us and overcame whatever objections some of us had to surrendering. He said that we had fought a gallant fight and our morale had been very high. Also, that in his opinion, the leaders would be executed, but that most of us would probably be sent to prison.
Tourists could see the historical. That is very important. That the new centre is linked. That interpretive centre that they spent €7 million on is immediately linked via the evacuation route to the actual site of the battlefield. There is no other country in the world that you can walk literally 20 yards off the main street and you're on the battlefield.
Everything that we have seen today will be levelled, destroyed and lost forever, other than these 4 buildings.
Which are derelict now.
Which lie derelict today, under the financial control of the state through NAMA. Through the course of this campaign we've discovered history in this area, and that history is about to be destroyed by the state, which came into existence through the events that occurred here. It's the most astonishing story, really, of the failure of successive administrations to secure, preserve and protect for future generations the very birthplace of our republic.
The courage of their graves, and they went with souls undaunted to their doom.